and despite my numerous auditions, I haven't received many offers. After that, Grant Torino approached me and began speaking to me in a little role. Imagine being turned down for every single one of your father's film auditions. Scott Eastwood lives like that. Scott didn't get the call, even after Clint instructed American Sniper. Scott had to subsist by parking cars and mixing drinks while his father was winning Academy Awards. He was a better bartender than an actor. He was so scorched by Hollywood by the age of 35 that he thought about becoming a firefighter. His professional difficulties, however, are hardly the most startling aspect. That's what transpired when he eventually confronted his father. Scott Clinton Reeves was born in Monterey, California on March 21, 1986. There were no headlines announcing his birth. Even Clint Eastwood, his own father, didn't publicly acknowledge it. Clint was already well known at the time, having directed and starred in successful films like Pale Rider. However, Scott's life was quietly starting in the background of a scandal while he stood strong on red carpets. Jacelyn Reeves, his mother, was a flight attendant. In the middle of the 1980s, she had met Clint on one of his frequent travels. A covert affair that lasted for at least 3 years ensued. Years in which Clint was openly associated with Sandra Lockach, an actress. Locke was unaware that he was leading 2 separate lives. Only after a long litigation years later did she learn about Scott and his younger sister Catherine, whom she thought were exclusive. The Eastwood name was not on Scott's birth certificate at the time of his birth. In a covert effort to hide the affair, he was listed as Scott Clinton Reeves. In 1988, Catherine was born. The truth could no longer be concealed indefinitely by that point, because the secret had spread so widely. But Clint didn't raise kids, and he didn't publicly acknowledge them either. Clint had previously been mayor of the sleepy village of Carmel by the Sea, where Scott grew up. The boy who grew up there, however, did not lead a famous life. In the 1990s, his father could have made $15 million a movie, but Scott's world was totally different. Jacelyn relocated them to Hawaii when he was 10 years old. It was more than a simple change of scenery. Scott and the Eastwood spotlight were to be separated by thousands of miles. Scott had a simple life there, one that his peers never questioned. They were unaware of his father's involvement in Hollywood. Additionally, Clint remained mostly out of sight and out of reach. Scott survived on the wages of Jacelyn, a flight attendant, while Clint amassed a fortune through Hollywood blockbusters and new ventures. When he was a teenager, he did construction jobs. He was a waiter. He did not attend Loyola Marymount University with the assistance of a trust fund. He covered his own expenses. He continued to use his given name, Scott Reeves, while pursuing a degree in communications, taking acting lessons and trying out for little roles. He was not looking for preferential treatment. The denial occurred even though he didn't want Clint's assistance. Scott subsequently acknowledged that he tried out for almost all of his father's movies, but was rejected each time. Clint declined to assist. Even when he directed American Sniper, a movie that made over $547 million and had 6 Oscar nominations. He didn't give Scott any significant roles. Scott only desired one shot. He failed to understand. Clint had a straightforward philosophy. No favors, no handouts. You deserve it. That may seem noble, but for Scott, it meant years of building houses, parking cars, and working on low-budget movies while his father took home Oscars. His early roles were hardly noticeable. Scott played a little part as Private Roberto Lunsford in Clint's 2006 film, Flags of Our Fathers. The name Scott Reeves was used to credit him. Nobody was aware that he was Clint's son. That was his desire, but it came at a heavy price. He failed to notice the momentum, the headlines, and the attention. He was lost in the credits of movies like Player 5150 and Pride. These weren't only independent movies. Some went directly to the video. Others only performed in a few theaters. Despite his best efforts, he was unable to break free from his career stumbling block. It wasn't any easier for his family. Clint Eastwood was married to 6 different women and had 8 children. One piece of that puzzle was Scott. Lori, who was born in 1954 and placed for adoption, was one of his half-siblings. Kimber was born to a stunt woman in 1964. Clint's marriage to Maggie Johnson produced Kyle and Allison. Morgan, born in 1996 to news journalist Dina Ruiz, and Francesca, born in 1993 with actress Frances Pfizer. Some of these kids had affluent upbringings. Others did not, such as Catherine and Scott. Some didn't cross paths until they were adults. Family get-togethers were uncomfortable. Under the surface, resentment simmered. Scott had a hard time growing up in Hawaii. He acted out. Due of his fighting, he was suspended. He then described his anger management problems. Although he was aware of his father's identity, he was unable to discuss it. He couldn't be asked why he wasn't there. He was unable to articulate to others why he felt both significant and unnoticeable. He enrolled at Carmel High after they got back to California in 2000. The truth slowly came to light. He was treated like a king by some of his peers. He was ridiculed by others. To avoid the parallels, he thought about retaining the name Reeves indefinitely. He had finished hiding by college. However, he continued to reject Clint's influence. He submitted an application for financial assistance. He put in a lot of overtime. He tried out for jobs that paid almost nothing. Then something started to change. Scott was cast in the 2009 film Invictus. Scott used his real last name, but it was still another Clint Eastwood movie. The movie was about proving yourself in a stressful situation. Fighting to be taken seriously was the goal, and Scott was doing just that. Scott Eastwood took a huge gamble at the age of 26. Not one, but 3 horror movies signed him to a deal. No one even knew his true name, and his position in Texas Chainsaw 3D would have tied him into a trilogy. In order to avoid being identified as Clint Eastwood's son, he continued to use his given name, Scott Reeves. In August 2011, the filming took place in Shreveport, Louisiana. Even the first Texas Chainsaw Massacre had escaped Scott's notice. He had only seen the Jessica Biel adaptation of it. Nevertheless, he entered one of the most recognizable horror franchises. It was marketed as a direct sequel to the 1974 original and ended up becoming the 7th installment. Then a significant turning point occurred. A year later, in 2014, Scott starred in Brad Pitt's grim World War II movie, Fury. This wasn't a small part. He portrayed Sergeant Miles, the newest member of the tank crew. The National Board of Review's Best Ensemble Award went to the performers. As a result, Eastwood was now standing shoulder to shoulder with Pitt, Shia LaBeouf, and John Bernthal, all of whom were still attempting to disprove that he was riding on a famous last name. It was recognized by the industry, and it went beyond simply showing up. Scott had to operate actual Sherman tanks from the 1940s and undergo rigorous military training. It was emotional, physical, and raw labor, but it was worthwhile. Critics began referring to him as a legitimate actor and not merely Clint's kid for the first time. In 2015, a year later, Scott made yet another surprising move. Into romance this time. He plays a bull rider who falls in love in Nicholas Sparks's film, The Longest Ride. Classic Sparks, slow burns, intense feelings, and unachievable decisions were all there. Here's the crazy part though. Scott performed his own stunts while bull riding. That was in the midst of a year full of big films and Marvel celebrities. Scott nevertheless drew ahead. He even received a nomination for Breakout Star in a choice film. Studios had a new perspective on him. And just when everyone believed they understood Scott, he surprised them all once more. He appeared in Taylor Swift's Wildest Dreams music video later that year. Not only a cameo, he portrayed the main love interest in an African film set in the magical 1950s that was directed by Joseph Kahn. It was among Swift's most sultry and dramatic music videos. Both the outrage and the sultry sequences were unexpected. Industry insiders cautioned him against it. Scott pursued it despite their warning that it would damage his reputation as a serious actor. The video debuted on August 31, 2015, during the MTV VMAs pre-show. It received millions of views in a matter of hours. There was a twist to it as well. Wild Animal Conservation received all of the earnings. Scott Eastwood, meanwhile, concealed a devastating truth for nearly 3 years. He eventually came clean in a 2017 interview with GQ Australia. Jewel Brangman, his lover, lost her life in a car accident back in 2014. She was just 26. It was not a serious crash. It was the type of mishap that most people ignore. However, Jewel didn't. She passed away right away. Scott also never mentioned it. Not to her family, not to the public. He didn't say anything until that particular interview. Jewel was renting a 2001 Honda Civic and traveling from San Diego to Los Angeles. She caused a minor chain reaction collision while traveling by softly rear-ending another car. Nothing appeared to be lethal. Jewel's car had a terrible secret, yet no one else was seriously hurt. In 2009, the airbag within was recalled. It was never repaired by the rental company. She was not saved by the airbag when it deployed. She was killed. Inside, the compounds were no longer stable. The canister of metal burst. Her neck was ripped by a shrapnel fragment. Scott claimed it shattered her back because it was so violent. The only injury was that she was killed by one flying piece of metal. It was a Takata airbag. In the United States, their airbags were installed in 24 million vehicles. In American history, it grew to be the largest car recall. That recall, however, came too late for Jewel. The consequences included her. Alexander Brangman, her father, was devastated. To be nearer to his daughter, he had relocated across the nation. His only child was her. His best friend was her. She promised to always be his little girl on the final Father's Day card she handed him. She vanished 3 months later. Scott was heartbroken. He claimed to have lost friends in the past, but never a loved one in that way. He had never experienced losing a spouse. He was altered by that. It made dating more difficult, he claimed. It made it more difficult to trust others. He didn't even tell Jewel's father for years. I still haven't found the right words, he said in 2017. Jewel's dad had pleaded for clarification. He wanted everyone to see how much he loved her. Scott, however, said nothing, and it was obvious when he did speak. He was not cured. He remained broken. The collision wasn't the only thing that hurt Scott. It resulted from his failure to act. He never called or made contact. That guilt hung over him. When he did open up, it was much more than grief. It was about terror, emotional paralysis, survivor's remorse, and shame. His father had lost everything, and he was unsure of how to handle him. But Scott Eastwood had a different type of mentor before all of that, before the heartache. Paul Walker. The star of Fast and Furious was more than just a colleague. In addition to being a big brother, buddy, and guy, he also taught Scott something that would later help him mentally survive: Japanese Jiu-Jitsu. Around 2007, Paul introduced Scott to the sport. For Paul, it was a way of life, not merely a kind of exercise. He received instruction from well-known figures like Ron Shiraki and Ricardo Frania Miller. He even converted a portion of his house in Hawaii into a training facility. He cherished it so much. When Paul passed away in 2013, he was already a brown belt. He was going to receive his black belt shortly. Although he never made it, his teachers posthumously gave it to him 2 weeks after his passing. Scott was serious about Paul's present. He didn't train haphazardly, he accepted it. He claimed that it taught him how to manage his ego, maintain his humility, and deal with both physical and mental anguish. The lesson was, no matter who you are, you'll choke some people out, and some will choke you out, he added. You couldn't be protected on the mat by celebrity, strength, or a Hollywood last name. Every inch was earned. This was crucial for someone like Scott, who grew up under Clint Eastwood's shadow. Something that pulled the expectations away was what he needed. It was jiu-jitsu. He learned to respect his boundaries as a result. It provided him with a secure place to fail. It became a part of who he was. At one point, Joe Rogan gave an explanation of why jiu-jitsu is particularly effective for men. According to him, it allows individuals to let go of pent-up emotions, quit acting, and deal with fear and rage without resorting to violence. It makes you more modest. It helps you relax. For Scott, it accomplished precisely that. Following Jules's passing, jiu-jitsu became more than just physical exercise. It turned into therapy. Scott claimed that it kept him centered and motivated. He showed up even when he didn't want to and practiced frequently. He gained mental as well as physical power from that regimen. Paul Walker miraculously saved Scott Eastwood twice. He was first introduced to the sport, and then he was given the means to live after Jewel. Despite the sorrow of Paul's passing, his influence endured. That was something Scott brought with him. He honored his friend each time he went on the mat. He honored Jewel each time he stood back up. Scott Eastwood wasn't content to merely follow in his father's footsteps as an actor. He desired to forge his own route. When he joined The Fast and the Furious, one of the largest series in the world. In 2017, that route blasted open. He portrayed Little Nobody, a federal agent in a sharp suit. The part was written to cover Paul Walker's absence. Eastwood made no attempt to emulate him. Rather, he contributed his own style, humor, and charm. The character enjoyed fast automobiles, shared the same sense of honor, and only slightly disagreed with the team to gain their respect. Eastwood gained immediate international recognition thanks to the franchise, which has now generated over $6 billion in revenue globally. It wasn't merely a cameo either. He demonstrated his ability to handle major action and large stars by assisting in the hunt for Cypher, the antagonist created by Charles Theron. But it wasn't a singular incident. Eastwood grew even more in 2018. He stepped into the enormous shoes of the original film's legacy by co-leading Pacific Rim Uprising. Robots, monsters, explosions, and Eastwood were all prevalent in the film. The movie made $291 million, though critics weren't impressed. And despite CGI physical stunts and green screens, Eastwood stood tall. He passed the test to see if he could carry a worldwide blockbuster. Then he changed course in 2019. The Outpost was not ostentatious or noisy. It was achingly honest, passionate, and unvarnished. Eastwood portrayed a soldier who was stranded in one of the riskiest engagements of the war in Afghanistan. It was not a fantasy of heroes. It was emotional, frightful, and messy. It was praised by the critics. The rating on Rotten Tomatoes was 93%. Veterans reported that it seemed authentic. This time, Eastwood did more than just demonstrate his fighting prowess. One critic even remarked that he sounded just like a youthful Clint as he murmured the line, "No, not today." He showed that he was capable. Fans had missed him in F9, but he made a triumphant comeback in 2023 in Fast X. Little Nobody took over after Mr. Nobody left. They stacked the cast. Brie Larson, Vin Diesel, and Jason Momoa were all defeated by Eastwood. The film hinted that Eastwood's role would grow even more significant in subsequent tales. He remained useful and relevant in a franchise that is always changing. He took his greatest leap to date in 2025. Alarm wasn't your average action movie. Michael Polish directed the 95-minute battle with Sylvester Stallone, which Lionsgate released. The narrative followed two former spies as they attempted to live in harmony. They are drawn back into the pandemonium by a plane disaster, a murderous pursuit, and an enigmatic hard drive. The grit was brought by Stallone. The fire came from Eastwood. Watching them together was like a master class, the director stated. Eastwood also did more than just make it through the scenario. He mirrored every motion made by Stallone. It was more than a film. Action legends seemed to be passing the mantle from one generation to the next. Eastwood was also building something else while the cameras were rolling, produced here. Started in 2019 with businessman Dine Chapin. This was no ordinary line of celebrity apparel. The mission was patriotic. American-made should still have meaning, according to Eastwood. Their business began with the fundamentals. Boxers, socks, and t-shirts are all produced in U.S. facilities. They are not cheap or outsourced. Every thread has real American hands behind it. He truly meant it when he added, "It's the hardworking folks across the country that make our brand possible." Eastwood did more than serve as a spokesperson. He and Chapin worked closely together to ensure that each garment fit perfectly. It was an easy yet audacious notion. create high-quality everyday necessities, and share the tales of the artisans who created them. Every product served as a reminder that American manufacturing was still alive and well. All it needed was someone to give it new life. September 2019 saw the soft launch of the brand. Supporters could get early discounts on their website, but it was difficult behind the scenes. They needed to find suppliers who shared their vision, improve materials, and rethink designs. The majority of these goods were often produced elsewhere. Eastwood was committed to demonstrating their superiority at home. It wasn't about following trends in fashion, it has to do with pride. Every product had a backstory in addition to its label. It demonstrated what America was still capable of producing if someone was prepared to take the chance. But clothes wasn't the only thing created here, it was a much larger vision. According to Eastwood, their present line was only the start. With an emphasis on worker pride and continued American manufacturing, they aimed to diversify into new markets. They had no desire to sell goods. They aimed to alter consumers' perceptions of purchasing them. It was a movement supported by genuine principles. Scott Eastwood's early years were never typical. Not with Clint Eastwood for a father. Not when everyone knows what your last name means before you do. When Scott was only 16, their relationship reached its peak intensity. He made a grave error. He left his sister, 14, alone at the party he accompanied her to. It was not a huge thing to him. Perhaps all he wanted to do was go out with his mates and drink a beer. Clint, however, didn't hold back when he learned. Grabbing Scott, he hit him in the face and smashed him against the wall. There was no lecture. There was no warning. The lesson was violent. Clint seized him by the throat and said a single word. At a party, you never abandon your sister. Never. Scott never forgot that moment. Clint Eastwood was raised in a different era when being a father meant using harsh discipline. Later on, Scott said that his father didn't support modern parenting. You did something bad at their home. You were disciplined. That was the way it went. No handouts were available. Clint gave Scott's request for $8,000 to purchase a truck little thought. No, he simply said. Scott was employed. He was making money. That was sufficient. The rest he had to work out on his own. And he did. He learned more than survival skills from Clint. He instilled in him the values of punctuality, hard effort, and taking life seriously. According to Scott, that's where his hustler mindset originated. He had to work for what he wanted. In 2022, Scott made one of the most significant choices of his career. He was offered a 3-picture deal by Warner Brothers. One of them was a member of the Suicide Squad. It was the type of offer that most performers hope to receive. Big exposure, big money. Scott, however, wasn't pleased with it. The pact didn't sit well with him. Clint didn't try to pressure him. He informed his father, "They don't want to pay me real money, and there's no script for the next film." That was all he said. If it feels right, do it. If not, don't. No pressure, no fancy words, just intuition. Scott then left the transaction. Something significant was revealed in that moment. Clint was more than just a dad. He served as a mentor. Their relationship wasn't based just on lessons or disagreements, but he taught Scott that respect and intuition should guide career decisions rather than celebrity or wealth. It was based on stories as well. Clint is now 94. He is among the surviving icons of classic Hollywood. Scott is aware of that. He makes an effort to get as many stories as possible from him. There are occasionally outlandish tales about ancient movie sets or Frank Sinatra. Tales that might go well in a museum. Since Clint rarely tells them, Scott pays close attention when he does. You won't be here indefinitely. He meant it when he told his father once. As a child, Scott recalls working on the Space Cowboys set. He recalls being in the seat next to Clint as he piloted a helicopter across the California coast. Clint would occasionally even let him use the controls. That kind of moment wasn't only cool. Scott was able to witness the true nature of his father thanks to them. He was totally in control of his universe, brave and focused. Scott is currently creating his own universe. Regretting You, his upcoming big-budget movie, is based on a best-selling Colleen Hoover book. On October 24, 2025, it is scheduled to open in theaters. The cast is stacked: McKenna Grace, Dave Franco, and Allison Williams. The narrative is poignant. Decades of secrets are revealed and a family is destroyed in an automobile tragedy. Hoover is an executive producer herself. Scott is aware of the strength of the Hoover fan base. If the movie succeeds, he's entering a potentially explosive environment, but he's not stopping there. He portrays Robson in Stolen Girl, a man who assists in locating a kidnapped child who was sent to the Middle East. It is based on Maren Dava's real story. The mother is portrayed by Kate Beckinsale. The film, which was filmed in Italy, explores conflict zones, international betrayal, and unwavering parental love. It's realistic, painful, and gritty. In addition, he is filming Lucky Strike, a World War II movie that takes place during the Battle of the Bulge. Rod Lurie, who also created The Outpost, is the director. It's a personal story. It is based on an actual interview the author conducted at the age of 16 with a war veteran. In particular, the thought of constantly being away from his children in order to continue working in a business that is unpredictable. Even though he was exhausted by Hollywood, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu kept him grounded. His friend Paul Walker was the reason he became involved. Walker introduced him to the sport perhaps 6 to 8 years before to his untimely death, and they had met more than 10 years prior. It was Paul's obsession. He could work out whenever he wanted because his house in Hawaii had mats. Eastwood was influenced by that. He began training diligently, and it transformed him. On Joe Rogan's podcast, he discussed it and referred to jiu-jitsu as the ultimate form of humility. Rolling on the mat served as a reminder to him that ego is meaningless in a place like Hollywood, where everyone is striving for approval and position. Some people will be choked out by you. You will be strangled by people. It's easy, he claimed. It's truthful. Additionally, it dispels the myth that you are unique. That attitude, that serenity, that sense of truth. That's why the most grounded people I've ever met are the best jiu-jitsu guys, he remarked.